Hey, Jason, welcome on, man.
Hey, glad to be here.
Appreciate your time. Very excited to
Yeah,
talk to you.
likewise. We've
Absolutely.
interacted a lot on X.
I
It's nice
know,
to
and I
nice to meet you in
appreciate that.
person.
Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely.
same.
Right off the bat, I'm going to hold up the book that's going to be the topic of our discussion today.
Mhm.
Great read. Thank you for writing it. I started off hating the idea, National Divorce, A Plan for Peace, for anyone who
Yep.
can't see, by Jason Fry. So secessionism,
Yeah.
not really a topic that was on my radar, I'll tell you that. And my first reaction was, I hate the idea. I mean, who would
Mhm.
like the idea? I mean, that's horrible. I grew up in a suburb of New Jersey, putting my hand over my heart.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
searching for my political identity, going through my journey, but I love
Mhm.
America, and I'm
Right,
trying
right.
to reconcile that with my dad's very left, very critical
Mhm.
worldview.
Right, right.
And but secession wasn't on the radar.
Mm.
So I started off thinking it was crazy, and after reading the book, I said, you know what? It really made me think. I'll tell you that it's a very easy read. It's a very fun, in a sense, it's a light read, and it's
That's
how
what
can
I
you
was
make it?
shooting for,
I
man.
know
I
you were,
mean,
because I did my research and I listened to
yeah,
your other interviews.
yeah,
No, great
yeah.
work.
So,
No,
so
how can
there.
you managed to make a heavy topic very light
Mhm.
and very thought provoking.
Thank you.
So welcome, pumped for this. I've met a lot of libertarians doing my podcast in the last 3
Mhm.
years.
Mhm.
Um, what is the relationship between libertarianism and secession?
Interesting question. So, the essence of libertarianism is self-determination, right? I would like to be left alone and do things my way. Secession, to some degree, is just that cranked up to the government level, right? It is not about um, "f you, I'm out of here." It's about I would like it my way in my neighborhood, right? So that's a way that I look at it. You know, when when I started writing this book, I come from a fairly conservative Christian background, and so there's this huge part of me that's like, well, divorce is terrible, right? Divorce is bad. Like, why would you advocate for that? Um, and I get that. I understand that. That's what I feel about divorce and marriage. But the key difference here is worth mentioning. So when my wife and I got married, we dated a while. We decided, I think I like that one. Let's stick together a while, right? And then we made some vows in front of our God and our friends, and and have pledged to stick it out. And so far, 26 years, we've done so, right? I think that's the way it should be, right? But we also know that that's not the way it always goes. But point is, I chose my wife. We got married on purpose. When did we marry the United States?
Right.
There was no time
Point
when we
point
picked
made.
this. Now they make us say the pledge when we're kids until we learn what those words mean. Sometimes we stop, right? But when did we choose? When did we choose this government? We were all mostly born here, or else some people came. Some people came, right? But in my case, my ancestors came here in the 17 whatevers. I didn't pick this.
And even if you don't buy the argument that we today, each individual didn't consent to the social contract,
Mm-hmm.
you can, I mean, it's hard to ignore in the Declaration of Independence. I mean, the theme of our founding, the people have a right to
Mm-hmm.
self-determination.
It,
Revolution is kind of implied in the whole system. The right
it
to
is.
revolution
It
is
is.
implied.
We were started with secession.
Right.
So it's built into our system. It's interesting that we have not used or respected that. It's like you got this
Yeah.
extra appendage that you never use,
Mhm.
right? But it's really
Right.
there.
Well,
Um,
it's controversial. I mean, there's no
it
question.
is.
I mean,
It
it's
is.
foundational. It's fundamental
Mhm.
stuff.
So number one, I start with where you were. I was like, man, divorce is gross. Why are we using this? And the answer is because it's a metaphor, right? The metaphor does not extend to a national marriage. So when I respond as a Christian to negative about divorce, that's not relevant to this metaphor. We're talking about the metaphor of divorce as a negotiated separation. Uh, so that holds on a few levels.
Hmm.
We assume that when people get divorced, it's because things are not going well, right? Like
Right.
if everything was great, you wouldn't talk about that. We
Right.
assume that when you get divorced, it's not like you lock her out on a Tuesday and it's over, right? It's a process, a negotiated undoing of things, right? Um, we also assume when there's a divorce that killing the other one is not in balance, right? Like
Right.
just because we're breaking up our marriage doesn't mean like
Right.
that I have a right to abuse you some
Right.
way or another or kill you, right? That's still wrong. And all of those pieces of the metaphor hold pretty well. Maybe we'll
Right.
talk about some more of those as we go.
Yeah, no, I couldn't believe actually. I have a friend on X who is very honest, very critical of me. He's left leaning. He's a friend. He's very, I
Mhm.
mean, that's a real friend, right? To be honest
Yeah.
with someone.
Yeah. They'll tell you straight. That's pretty
Yeah.
important.
And he's been pretty quiet on me since I announced for Trump a couple months ago and went
Mhm.
through this whole part of my journey. But when I posted most recently a couple days ago that we were going to be having this conversation, I was very surprised at his interest in,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he's going to be watching this because he's like, I was a very reasonable lawyer and
Mm.
kind of a moderate seeming guy. And I couldn't believe his interest and
Yeah. Yeah.
openness to this subject. So I guess it begs the question, why obviously we're so divided, we're so polarized, everyone can
Yeah.
feel that. What is the reason for the main secession argument?
So, where do I start with that?
Right.
I would start. So, in my book, I don't argue that secession is the best answer. Okay. I don't say we should secede because we need to be divided. I take a little different angle. I say we are divided already, right? I go through some
Mm,
stats on that where, you show the red and blue maps, you show the regional differences on abortion or gun control or pick an issue, right? We're fairly divided already. So I'm making the case that if this were a marriage, which we say it's not, but if it were, we're already sleeping in separate bedrooms, running separate bank
hmm
accounts. Like things are not cool in this relationship. Um, so again, I take the point that secession really, in a national divorce metaphor, is really just acknowledging that we're separated and going through the motions of formally separating.
hmm
Okay, so that's the way I look at it. It's not an argument so much for leaving as it is for you going our separate ways, right?
Right. So where did the passion come from this issue? I know you've been working on this for quite a while. Tell me about the
Mhm,
history of
mhm.
this issue for you.
So for me, two big turning points. Number one was in about 2009. The Federal Department of Justice got involved in my day job. Okay, there were some good reasons for that. Our services have improved as a result. I'm not totally being critical of that process, but uh, I realized that the government of the most powerful country in the world is busting me on what I write in one piece of paperwork.
Mhm. Right.
Right. That was kind of what started pushing me libertarian. It's like, we can't solve the war on drugs. We can't solve the deficit. We
hmm
can't stop blowing up other countries. But by golly, we can check Fry's paperwork with a magnifying glass. Right. I mean, that was a major turning point in my philosophical growth was that shouldn't be that way. Right. The government should be focused on government stuff, not nitpicking at every level. Then you find out that they do the same in environmental levels and regulatory and banking. I mean, they love to be in stuff that I don't think they should be in. So that was one major turning point. The second, like that tipped me again 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What really got me started writing this particular book at this particular time is the story of Shelby Park. So in January of this year, in Eagle Pass, Texas. The border was fairly wide open at that point. There was a public park on the Rio Grande where untold numbers of people were coming through unobstructed. Okay, that park was under the quote operational control of the Border Patrol. They were controlling it by letting everybody in. The state of Texas did a little bit of legal research, figured out that okay, this is what kind of public is this, right? So they figured out that the feds did not have jurisdiction exactly on that piece of property, right? That the feds were on that piece of property with permission, not by right. Okay, that again, I don't know the super details, but at that point, Texas put up some fences and locked out the feds. That also locked out the park from people coming across, right? So the state of Texas took operational control of that area, including literally locking the feds out from coming onto that piece of property. So what you got was Texans lined up on one side, Americans lined up on the other side, right? Everybody's law enforcement officers. I'm fully convinced that nobody intended to escalate that. It's great that it didn't escalate, right? I'm not saying that's the way forward. I'm saying that what made me right was the concept that we were one bad guy in the bushes away from Lexington and Concord, We've all seen the gangster movie, right? Where all the drug dealers show up and everybody's got their guns out and don't shoot, don't shoot. No, you put yours down, you know. And the one little scared kid in the back fires and everybody's dead. Right. It's cliche. I felt
Mm,
like that's where we were as a nation in that moment. Not that anybody wanted to, but that we could accidentally end up in a place we didn't want to be. Right. And so that's what got me started on writing this. It's like somebody has got to come out ahead of this and say, well, guys, let's make a deal. Let's figure this out in a way where we don't accidentally, or especially not on purpose, but we don't even accidentally end up in a war. So I have two children in the military. I've got a 20-year-old Marine and a 19-year-old Air Force airman. And then I've got twin 7-year-olds. So,
mm,
you know, for me personally, if it comes to civil war, it's literally my kids are going to have to go fight. Right? I don't want that. I don't want that for my
right.
children. And so, again, as a fairly pacifist kind of guy, again, I thought, well, let's get out ahead of this before any potential violence breaks out, even accidental or on purpose. And let's get the message out. So that's kind of what tipped me over to this point right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I imagine my response at this stage in my development to any secessionist argument would be, okay, on one hand, you know, I'm curious what in your
Mm-hmm.
culture is bringing you to want to separate. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
understand, and we should talk more about, you know, the
Yeah.
assumption that we're declining and, um, you know, what's going on in our culture today and all those things. But on the other hand, it seems very pragmatic and very reasonable
Mm-hmm.
to be planning ahead. So, do we really believe that America is in such a state of decline? Have current events like COVID and we are,
Mm-hmm.
it seems plausible. Are we there?
No, no. I think maybe. Here's what I'm thinking. So, um, you if you've read the book, you know that I'm not a fan really of red or blue. Right. I mean, I vote a particular way, but both sides are terrible at the things that I'm fixing to point out. So, um, if you go back to Reagan or Bush one, you know, they messed with the economy in some ways. Bush one started a war. Um, Clinton kind of continued that war and did actually fix some things about the economy. Good. Uh, Bush two was the victim, along with the rest of us, of 9/11. Right? He didn't ask for that, I don't
Mm,
think. But that changed everything. But it also, you know, it gave us the Patriot Act. That's not patriotic. It gave us local surveillance. It gave us the TSA, where people can steal our
mm,
toothpaste in the name of keeping us safe. Right. Um, it gave us 20 years of undeclared war. Right. Right. And
mm.
so Obama, other team, still continued. Right. Still continued blowing up countries on the other side of the world. Trump comes in, and you know, he's kind of the bull in the china closet approach. And okay, I can see why that's useful sometimes. I can see why people vote for him. Um, but he just undoes everything. And then Biden comes in and redoes everything.
Right.
Right. And so what you get is this continued expansion of government power, continued, I would say, meddling in social issues. Right.
Hmm.
Now,
Right.
again, intentionally, I make no position on rights or wrongs of any of these issues I'm going to outline. Okay. I'm talking about, should the government do these things? Okay. So if you go all the way back to uh, Civil War, slavery. Okay. Again, I'm not a fan of slavery. I think that was wrong. But there was a time in Kansas when the people were disagreeing and killing each other over whether we should have slavery or not. That got a name called Bleeding Kansas. There were about 200 people killed in about over 5 years. So it's enough. It's bad, right? And then the government got involved in that issue and killed another 600,000 people, right? So you can argue maybe
Mm,
that it was worth the cost, but you can also say that it got worse, at least temporarily, because the government got involved. Um, you know, I would say segregation is another issue like that. It is wrong to forcibly segregate. Okay, I'm convinced. You know, even my ancestors that were in favor of that stuff, that's not right. But it is not wrong to intentionally segregate. Right, like nobody busts you for having a club of friends,
right.
regardless of of what,
Well,
if there's
today the left will, but yeah.
Well, they will, but if there's an African Methodist Episcopal Church that's all African American people,
That's
nobody
fantastic.
says they have no right to exist
Right.
because it's segregated, because they chose that, right? So
Right.
again, my position is that segregation is wrong when it's forced. And again, major social turmoil from the 50s and 60s because the government stepped into that and picked a side. Not y'all quit being assholes to each other, but rather we're going to change the law, and so you have to do it our way now. Okay, that same approach went with feminism later. More recently, it's been the homosexual or trans stuff, right? So, not you need to not be an ass to that guy, but rather the law is going to require you to accommodate that particular choice.
It's a very subtle point about the civil rights movement, which I think we're two good people here, and no one would deny.
I try hard.
Yeah, I know.
discriminate.
I believe it. I believe it. You more so than me. But it's a nuanced point that as a result of the civil rights movement and the Supreme Court's decisions in wake of it, we have now the federal government in this new role, and that has created some tension.
It absolutely has. Well, and the reason I start all the way back at slavery is because they did that with slavery. They did it with prohibition. Let's make all alcohol against the law by changing the Constitution. Oh, wait, that was a dumb idea. Let's change it back. Right. And then you've got civil rights, and then you've got abortion. It's like, let's make it the law of the land that everything's okay. Oh, wait, no, let's kick that back to the states. Right. And that flip flop on social issues that the government shouldn't be in to begin with, in my mind, is the background of that tension.
Right.
And I don't see them stopping. Why now? Well, because I don't think they'll quit. I think my entire lifetime worth of presidents have governed by executive order. The Supreme Court has flip-flopped on all kinds of things. The Congress actually fails to do much except spend a crap ton of money, right? When was the last time we had a meaningful actual change to the actual law or structure? Not really. I can't remember one. Right. So all of those pieces of dysfunction are, to me, what makes that tension. And I don't see it undoing. I mean, I don't see a way out of it without some radical change, dramatic change.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm starting to really start paying attention in earnest, for the first time at this point in my life. I always thought I did, but I was really just a surface level creature. And I see now, having come out of law school, the point made by a lot of critics of the government, which is the people, like Vivek says so eloquently and so succinctly, the people who we elect are not running the government. It's the administrative state. So you have this bureaucracy. You have a lot of people on different sides of the political aisle feeling like they're not being served. And so, it's funny. I have a frequent guest of the show, a friend of mine, who proposes going to a lottery system, qualified lottery system. So details are basically such that it's different for the House and Senate, but you have to have a business, you have to be a productive member of society, and then you do it by ping pong balls.
Interesting.
Basically, right? To get the money out of it.
I'm not convinced that would be worse than what we currently have.
Right. Well, that's the whole point.
I don't know if it'd be better, but I'm not convinced it would be worse.
The observation is, if you walk into a Starbucks, the odds are the cross-section of society is probably as capable or better than what we have. And it would get the sociopaths out. But then you have other people. I don't know if you know this guy, Aaron Day. You might know him in the Libertarian.
I've heard the name maybe, but I can't.
He's just a guy, a random guy that I met, and who called. My point is, I hear these people that I'm talking to, mostly libertarians, frankly, saying that this is a big moment. We need some sort of serious change, whether it's a lottery system, whether it's secession, whether it's a constitutional conventions. We need a new. You write in the book, so I think there's agreement around the spectrum that our government is not working for us.
Yeah. So even from the left, I don't think even the people who want more social services or want more intervention in social issues, I don't think they really want to go $34 trillion in debt and blow up other countries. Right. So my point is not that the government is left or right. It's that it doesn't really serve anybody well. And so, I've been, what do they say? The purpose of a system is what it does. right?
Mhm.
I don't see a way to unpack that without the system being opposed. So I think
Right.
you have to
Go
start
for
over,
yeah.
right?
Go for the head.
And I intentionally didn't say burn it down and start over. I think you have to choose to do something different, right? One of the rules of counseling or life is that if you do what you've done, you get what you got,
Mm.
right? If you do what you've always done, you get what you always got. And so for 2 centuries at plus, we have voted harder. We have tried to put our best candidates forward. We have, tried to be involved and try to influence the system. And we've, everything that the mainstream thinks we should be doing to change the government. We've been doing that. We've been doing that our whole career as a
Right.
country, and
Right.
this is the point that got us to. So I can't believe that voting harder or changing the color of the jersey on the bus driver is going to change the trajectory of the thing, because that's the same strategy that got us here to begin with. So that's kind of where I come from on secession. It's not that maybe it's the awesomest thing in the world. It's going to be easy and we should do it on Tuesday. It's that it will take something that dramatic, I think, to shift. And it'll have to be a secession, not a reform, because we've tried reform our entire political existence, right? There was no day when we thought, let's elect the worst candidates, right? There
Right.
was no day when we thought, let's try to have a government that doesn't work. No, we've been trying to make it
Right.
work for 2 centuries and a half. And so I don't see, pragmatically, I don't see that strategy moving us forward.
So the argument is that we have this federal bureaucracy. It's unaccountable to the people that
Mm-hmm.
we're actually electing. It's out of control. It's not serving really the American people's interest, no matter where you
Mm-hmm.
land. The
Mm-hmm.
power is swinging back and forth at the federal
Mm-hmm.
level through executive orders because our Congress is paralyzed, because they've
Yep.
delegated their authority to the executive agencies. And so
Mm-hmm.
now who the president is matters, whereas historically it didn't, because
Right.
they really essentially put the people in place on the executive agencies
Mm-hmm.
who are actually making the laws due to the
Mm-hmm.
delegation doctrine, which
Yep.
is, I think,
Yep.
being cut back now. And so it's an interesting time. And we certainly
Yeah.
need, we'll get to like the current incoming administration
Yeah. It'll
and
be
what you think
interesting
about it.
too.
Yeah,
It'll be a
it
fun
will be.
discussion.
But the point is the power swings back and forth. And as you've said in the book and on your different interviews, it feels to you and people on your camp that we're only held together by the threat of force.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I want to touch on before, two other points before I turn it back to you is the bigness is the problem is a theme that you hear out of
Mm-hmm.
secessionists and you've made.
Yep.
And
Right and
that
left. Yeah.
right and left. And so you have several chapters about tribes and how tribes are good, but it's the forcing. So the point is, it's the
Mm-hmm.
forcing, it's the swinging, it's the you go my way, I go mine. Isn't that better than having this constant pendulum that
Mm-hmm.
isn't serving anyone?
Yep.
And so
That's
we
the
want to
argument.
feel like we're moving forward, right? In history, we want to feel like we're progressing. We don't want to feel like we're regressing. But I suppose the argument is that, well, sometimes fracturing is part of progress and it's a cycle, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So where do I even start with that? Let's see. Yeah. So you've kind of nailed the argument
Yeah,
well, that
exactly.
we're not at a point where progress can be made under the same umbrella. Every time I'm impressed that you haven't immediately gone to, but the Civil War, right? That's what most people that react
Right.
against secession lead with, right? Is, well,
Right.
the Civil War settled that issue, right?
Right.
So that's why myself, other libertarians would say, that we are only held together by the threat of violence.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument is, well, how did that work last time you tried to secede? We kicked your ass, right?
Right.
And if you try it, we'll do it again. You know who says stuff like that? Joe freaking Biden,
Yeah.
right? You don't need AR-15s. You need F-15s and some
Yeah.
nukes if you want to take on the government.
Yeah, you
right?
write about it in your book, and I heard you talk about it on other shows
Yeah.
recently.
I
These
don't have to make
politicians,
that up. These guys do it for us.
right? I mean,
So-
and it's indicative, as you've said with other
Mhm.
people, it's indicative. If that's the reaction you're going to get from someone in power, well, is that not a clear sign that the
Shouldn't
relationship
that tell you
is?
that it's a bad idea, right? So it's the
Yeah.
same as if, I don't beat my wife, but if I beat my wife when she tried to leave last time, and I say, if you try to leave again, I'm really going to freaking kill you
Right.
this time,
Right.
right? Well, that's no good. That's not a relationship. That's not good on any level at all.
Yeah.
And that's the response we get, honestly, out of the governmental structure. when we propose minding our own business. It's like, well, how'd that work out for you last time? I'll kick your ass
Right.
again, right? Well, that's no good. That indicates that things are broken. And I would
Right.
say, even the right establishment makes that argument. Again, I've had a lot more contact with the right than the left, just because that's, again, my personal culture. But I've worked carefully to present this as a nonpartisan issue, as for everybody to see that it's kind of dysfunctional, and that the better answer is you go be you over there, and I'll go be me over here.
Yeah.
We'll quit giving the government so much power to pull us back and forth.
Right. It is controversial. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You
Yeah,
got to know that, right? Like going
Oh,
into
of
it.
course, of
So
course.
how do the secessionists feel about that? I mean, you must be ultimately proud, because this is a conviction. And
Yeah, I mean, it's something I believe strongly. But here's where I'm coming from the secessionist standpoint. So I have advocated for Texas independence. See my flag there for 6 or 7 years behind a pseudonym, and the writing in that field is easy. Let me show you the formula. Something happened. That's bad. Could we do it better if we were independent? You can write that article 5,000 times, right?
Right.
Or something happened. That's good, but how good would it be if we did it on our own?
Right.
Or how good would it be if the government was out of the way? It's the same formula over and over and over, writing about current events. So I've written a few hundred articles like that. But then, Marjorie Taylor Greene, not a big fan personally, but she threw out national divorce as a slogan, or as a concept. And the whole world of Twitter went freaking crazy, right? Went nuts. And the right and the left, honestly. And the secessionists who have been working on this for a long time.
Was it COVID that prompted that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. It was. I haven't been able to find the exact date, or I would have.
Yeah, but it must have been COVID.
It was early 2021 or late 2020, somewhere in there. But anyway, so she throws out national divorce. Everybody goes nuts. But those of us who've been working on this for a long time, our response was national divorce is a slogan, not a plan, right? You can't just national divorce. There's got to be something behind that, right? And so a reason that I wrote this book right now is to take that rhetoric or that metaphor and flesh it out with the plan that conveniently, wink, wink, matches the plans that secessionists have been doing now for a decade or two, right? So my answer is not let's call a convention and vote on Tuesday and be independent on Wednesday. Okay, that would be a terrible way to do things. My answer is let's use the existing legal and legislative processes to put something to a vote, and let's use democracy to let the people decide if they're in or out, right? So the Texas and New Hampshire method would be to put a bill through the legislature that authorizes a vote. The vote then authorizes our guys to go upstairs and say, guys, we'd like to leave. Here are 37 things we need to negotiate, right? So that we can be gone in 3 years, right? That is very, very different than, rolling tanks to the border and saying we're independent now. If you roll tanks, you get tanks rolled back every time, right? So we're trying to do democracy. So again, as a fairly pacifist guy, if the government threatens to bomb me for voting, seriously,
Right.
that's their position. That's irrational. It's in my mind impossible. Now, I also don't trust those guys. They may do terrible things, but that's where I'm coming from. Fort Sumner, they started shooting at each other. That was the mistake. Right? You've got, that's why I'm not a fan of Abe Lincoln. I joke about.
Tell me about Abe Lincoln and the Civil War. Educate me. If I was smarter and more.
Well, I don't know. So what
would I be saying to you if I was more educated?
What we were taught in school is that Abe Lincoln went to war to save the Union and free the slaves. Okay. That sort of happened, I guess. That's sort of true. The slaves weren't really free. There was Jim Crow for another century, right? But sure, they were nominally free. Was the Union saved? Kind of, because they would kill us if we didn't save it their way, right? My personal take on Lincoln, though, is that he chose violence to win. He wanted to win. He would rather go kill 600,000 people to have it his way than to just let the South go. right?
Mm.
In response to voting, they voted. They got the people together and said, we'd like to be out now. And his response was, well, we need to send some more guns down there. Then we need to go kill 600,000 people to fix this. No, no, we need to respect the will of the people to separate. That's why I hate Lincoln, not because he wasn't right about slavery or whatever, but because he chose violence.
Because he was wrong about political determination, self-determination.
Yeah, he chose violence, and he did a bunch of stuff that was unconstitutional in terms of the way he treated people on his own, dissenters on his own side.
Yeah.
I don't think he was a great guy. What we're taught that he saved the Union and freed the slaves. Cool. I'm in favor of that, actually. But that was not the right move to do that by force. That's why I'm a Lincoln hater personally, because I would, I don't know. Slavery was probably unsustainable. There don't seem to be a whole bunch of other countries where that's the model anymore. Right? I think it was on its way out. It was going to go away sometime. That was not, even if it's wrong, which I think it was, that was not worth killing, hundreds of thousands of people to solve. The unchecked version of that in Kansas cost a couple of hundred people over the same amount of time.
Right.
So
interesting.
That's why I'm not a Lincoln fan, personally.
Is there a way? I mean, obviously there is a way, but can you not look at it and I'm genuinely just asking, was he not just standing up for, did he not say to himself, look, these values are worth going to war for? Obviously he did.
Yeah. I mean, maybe.
So what was the clash of values then? It was mostly, so pretend I'm Nikki Haley here and I don't know anything about Civil War.
Right.
It was about slavery.
I'm not a super student of that. Okay. So I'll give you what I think, but again, I'm free to be corrected. Okay. My understanding was that there were quite a bit of difference between the economic engines in the North and the South. One was more industrial, one was more agricultural. Therefore, the way that laborers were accommodated and used was very different, right? I would hire on at a factory where they just had all these guys that worked in the field. And so how that was structured was different, largely, again, because of what they're trying to produce, right? There was similar gamesmanship to what we have today, where a group of states would get together and pass a law to make it their way, that would actually be the opposite of what the other states wanted, right? The fugitive slave law, I think, is one that was important at the time, where there were some tariffs involved also, where the government was messing with importing and exporting that unduly impacted the Southern style of economy, and didn't really mess with the Northern style of economy. So again, I think whatever the issues were, I think the problem is the same one we have now, where you have special interest groups or coalitions ruling by majority, which is fine, I guess, but really doing it in ways that screwed over the other guys. And it's both sides. Right. So that's my take there, that it was really about that. And so, it'd be like, would an industrial nation be willing to give up its agricultural division? Probably not. I think it was economics was a huge piece of it. We had to save the Union because we'll have to recalibrate if we don't have all those guys down there.
Right. In this case,
too hard. It's too hard to not have their economy.
In that case, the economic issue and the cultural issue were completely
everything's always tied together. There's no one cause to anything ever in my mind. Again, I'm a behavior analyst in my day job. So my job is, well, why did that happen? What's behind that? And it's usually not one thing. It's usually, well, I didn't sleep so good. So then I was extra grumpy and my coffee was cold, but then I stubbed my toe. And that's when my kid asked me if I could do the thing for the 700th time. And then I popped on the kid, right? Like it's all, everything's related and there's always 10 things behind it. That's my take on the Civil War. So slavery was absolutely involved, but it was also economics. It was also a disrespect for self-determination, right? The fact that all these people could get together and vote, but that doesn't count enough. We got to go kill them. Right. There's all kinds of problems. In my mind, war is never the answer to any question ever. Really. So
That's a powerful. I mean, that's a very
I mean,
powerful
I mean,
argument.
I'm a hardcore pacifist. Like the
Yeah.
idea that that we should all get together and go kill those guys over there.
Yeah.
I'm
if
not
you believe
feeling
in
it.
self
Not
determination,
feeling it.
if you believe in self determination, and you believe, and you're a pacifist,
Mm-hmm. Largely, yeah.
yeah, except in obviously self defense, or if
Yeah, that's the.
revolution was just straight up required, look,
Mm-hmm.
these
Yeah,
things
of
happen.
course.
But generally, then you're going to be, you have to be open to this discussion. I mean, I think
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
to.
That's kind of where I'm at. It's like, and so we the United States meddles in everybody else's secessions, sort of, right?
Mm,
Or border disputes anyway, right?
mm,
Um, I'm not an apologist for ISIS and their methodologies or their human rights. Okay, so don't take this too far. But if me and a bunch of my friends got together and said, "Well, what if we made a country based on our religion?" and then they did it. Well, what's wrong with that, right?
right,
Why should a country on the other side of the world bomb you for that?
right,
Right? We have
right,
totally ignored their self determination
right, 100%.
in ways that we would object if they did it to us, right? Again, not that they weren't wrong, not that they weren't killing all kinds of people. I get that. I'm not an apologist for their methods, but I also understand where they're coming from.
Right,
I understand the criticism that America gets for being involved in that.
right,
Russia and Ukraine is another good one. So Russia has been encroaching on Ukraine for a long time. There was the Georgia thing, there was the Donbass thing, the Crimea thing, right? And that's all before this recent invasion. Um, those guys have argued over that territory forever, right? You're a Christian of some sort, I remember, or Jewish.
Reformed Jew. Yeah,
Okay,
like
right. I remember there was some religious background.
spiritual,
So,
more
well, my
religious
point,
these
my
days.
point is,
Yeah.
the Old Testament. Those guys never, ever, ever freaking quit fighting, ever. Right? And so, are we going to make it better by like getting a bigger stick and whacking the guys over there? No, culturally, they have never, ever stopped fighting.
Right.
People always fight. That's people. What we have
Mm.
done is added the ability to kill millions of people instead of hundreds.
And that's the
Right.
very anti-state argument. It's a very
Mm-hmm.
persuasive argument. The
Mm-hmm. I
argument
mean, it's
being,
persuaded me.
look, once again, smaller groups. There's
Mm-hmm.
going to be problems. Life ain't
Absolutely.
all tits and glitter. There's going to be war. There's going to be death.
Correct.
But the bigger the government, the bigger the death count.
Yeah, I mean, I say it takes world powers to have a world war. Like
Mm.
Liechtenstein is not going to take on China, or
Right.
it's just
Right.
not going to happen.
Of course, then you run up to the argument, and you must get this every podcast you do. But okay, we secede, and now, of course, there's going to be, as you write in the book, there's going to be defense agreements. I
Of
mean, look,
course, there
there's
has
like
to be
the
something.
processes.
We're still going to have neighbors.
Right. So address the question of China, wanting to, going
Yeah.
up. There.
Uh-huh. Okay. So number one, we are insulated from China by oceans. Okay. It is hard for China to get over here with piles of stuff. Definitely not quickly. It's interesting that today's Pearl Harbor Day. There are ways. There are ways to quickly and surprise attack, sure. But realistically, though, are there going to be 1 million Chinese soldiers on our doorstep in a month? No, it's impossible. There's too much logistics involved, right? Number two, what would be the gain for them? What would be the benefit of that to take over Texas? Okay.
And that's when you go with the old Democrats line. We'll just nuke your asses if you're on your way.
Yeah, yeah. But so the if this were a national divorce, right? Even if you just got divorced, would you want somebody else abusing your ex like immediately?
No, she's mine.
She's mine. Right?
Still mine.
I didn't even beat her like that. You can't beat her like that, or
right.
whatever the argument is. To attack a former U.S. state in the United States' backyard would be kicking the bear. It doesn't matter if we're independent or not, right? It's just like if China were to
then the question becomes,
if China were to attack Canada tomorrow,
right? Kicking the
Canada's
bear.
neighbors would be grumpy and be involved.
Right.
That dynamic doesn't change.
Good point. So then address the question of, well, do you weaken the bear by withdrawing?
Maybe. Again, I would argue that the bear is too strong. That's part of the problem. I talk in the book about the United States defense budget is about 3.84% of GDP. And the international average is about 2%. So we literally spend twice as much money on defense as anybody else. And we also have the highest GDP. So really, we're spending about 40 or 50% of the worldwide defense budget is us. Does an independent state need all that?
Right.
Not really. No more than Liechtenstein or Switzerland needs it. Right.
Right.
So
Right.
if we cut our military spending to even the national average, international average, we would still be able to defend ourselves at the average international level. Right.
Right.
I mean, that's the kind of the way the logic works. I don't know the numbers. I don't try to know numbers. I try to know common sense in the book.
I love that. That's why I was able to read your book, by the way.
Yeah.
So good.
I don't know those numbers.
Right.
But it's hard to argue with that, right? If we move ourselves to the average, then we're average level defensible. And most countries don't get invaded every Tuesday. Right. When it
Especially
happens,
in
it's
the
a
backyard.
big freaking deal. Right.
Mhm. Right.
And so I have fair amount of confidence that nobody's going to try to invade. People don't invade each other already most of the time.
Right.
So that's my take on that. Would it weaken the bear? To a degree. On paper, by a percentage of the GDP we contribute, or a percentage of the soldiers we contribute, or a percentage of the stuff that we get in the deal, right?
So maybe that would cause the bear to reflect, perhaps, and ultimately in the long run be
strengthened. You would hope. The goal is to not overextend the bear. I mean, that's what killed Rome. That's what killed Greece. That's what killed every nation in the world that has died. Almost.
So
the British Empire.
You could look at. Sorry, but you could look at this as cutting off a limb to prevent the spread of disease.
It's pruning. It's pruning. Yeah. You cut the limbs off the tree so the tree grows the way you want. Or it's not even cutting off a gangrene arm, because then you still lose the arm. You don't die, but you still lose the arm.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more like pruning a tree, where you cut off parts to make the other parts go the way you want.
Right.
It doesn't kill the tree. It doesn't hurt the function of the tree. The tree doesn't like it if you're the limb that gets cut off. But the tree doesn't die. The tree keeps growing. And, again, agricultural metaphor there, but that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. So I think the average critique you would hear from someone on the left, because that's where I come from, would be, like I mentioned earlier, what about civil liberties? They would say, look, that's my big concern. You split this. How do you protect women with abortion? How do you protect gay people, trans, and so forth? What is the response to that?
My response is you protect your neighbors. Okay. Regardless of what I personally agree or disagree with, there's a limit to what I should try to control, right? I mean, I fall in the camp where I believe abortion takes a life, and that there are very few circumstances under which taking a life is permissible. Okay, that's just me. But I also respect that that's probably one of the most difficult decisions of somebody else's life, and maybe I shouldn't use the power of government to legislate my preferences on somebody else's worst day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, that's my personal take. Again, I take issue with the right and the left on a lot of these things. So the answer is that you have to take care of the people next to you. I can be nice to the trans people that I know without arguing that the government should make rules one way or the other about that. That's my answer.
Right.
It is not so much a matter of disrespect or any civil liberties. It's that my job is to be kind to the people around me.
Yeah. I guess the point is that there are two camps, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
One group that believes the federal government is simply protecting people's rights and has not crossed any boundary. And the other group saying, no, you've crossed a line between promoting equality and then going to equity and social justice. And so all the woke stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I take issue with that largely because of the response to using levers of power to fix that. I think, personally, you should be able to hire and fire whoever you want based on their merits. Sure. Like the fact that the government should make you consider these other factors, that means you were an ass. If the government has to make you do that, you were acting irrationally some way. That again, that's my personal take. I also recognize that there are a lot of people in the world who do not see things that way. There are people who will take advantage. There are bad guys. Okay. So, I mean, I understand why the government intervenes sometimes, and I understand why there's a sizable portion of society that thinks that's good. Again, I would argue, going all the way back to Civil War, that our pattern is, let's stick our nose into some social issue and piss off 40% of the people. Right. I think that's how you get division, personally. The other angle would be, I believe that self-determination to some degree gives us the right to have it our way in our area of influence. So if Texas wants to ban abortion entirely, they say, man, that killing babies is murder. That's the worst thing in the world. We're going to quit it. Okay. That decision made by a smaller group is less restrictive and less controversial than that restriction made by a group that controls 350 million people. Right. Every issue is that way in my mind. Right. So if California wants to legalize drugs and have socialized health care, man, go for it. Do it. I don't want that, but you should do it. Right. We should be able to do what we want within our area of influence. The problem is the area of influence is too big. So that's my answer to that, is that it doesn't, I would not want to infringe on anybody's particular rights or preferences on most of those issues, even though I have strong opinions and I'll justify them 5 bullet points each or something,
Right. And as you say in the book, though, the whole point would be to strengthen the culture of each entity, of each state.
Absolutely.
And people would sort, and there would be a sorting process.
There would have to be a sorting. And, the sorting is critical, honestly. I believe we all have a right to live in a place that serves us well. Otherwise, why wouldn't you go someplace else, right? The idea that I'm going to move into a community and change that to my preferences is part of the problem.
That is actually something that you hear in life coaching circles. A buddy of mine is a strength coach. He's a really well-known and really great fitness guy turned life coach. And he's said literally for 20 years since I've known him, he's always said, because he's moved around, he's like, you don't like where you live? Pick yourself up and move.
Please.
Accountability, determination. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where I'm coming from. And, one of the fears people have is like, well, if some state secedes, I'm going to have to get a passport and a visa to go visit my grandma. That's stupid. Why would it have to be that way? We already have free trade-ish. We already have free travel-ish. That doesn't change because some section has a different political structure. I guess
it could. It sure could.
If Rhode Island says "F you all," we're putting a big wall around us, and you can't come in without permission from, whatever. They could do that. I think it would be foolish. They would have some consequences to that. But I think the best path forward for everybody is free trade and free movement. And so for people to clamp down, it wouldn't be self-serving. They might think it was, but it wouldn't work. In my mind. And so, one step to making this peaceful is that all of us have that responsibility to find our place and find our tribe. Be those people, right? Don't try to move someplace and make it how you want it. You move someplace where it is, it is. Or you take a big enough group of people where you can have it your way,
where you are
in the midst, right? So again, I think there are towns with a Chinatown. Cool, man, that's fine. They can exist. They can have a culture, and they can have whatever kind of structure they want. We're still going to follow the same basic rules, but I'm not saying they shouldn't exist because they're choosing to be different. The Mormons that moved and sort of took over Utah. Okay, that's a thing. Get all your guys and go somewhere. The Free State Project in New Hampshire. Let's move as many libertarians as we can to this one place because they have a government structure that suits that. Cool. Do it.
I'm interested in this idea of, because one of the things, if you were to slow down and say, well, what would we be losing if the union were to dissipate? There is, when looking at the glass half full, a beautiful, intricate system of case law and constitutional provisions that is quite beautiful and elegant, with the basic rights that we would all agree on, like free travel and such and things. It's interesting to think that you would in the scenario, take those core principles that 99.9% of people would agree are good and turn them into agreements that would just have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, they wouldn't necessarily get approved. So that's the risk.
Right.
But
There is some risk.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The other risk that I see is that, again, that some side decides to use force to have it their way, one way or the other.
Right.
I'm not in favor of Texas independence via military withdrawal. Right.
Right.
For example, I'm not in favor of enforcing abortion rights by blowing up abortion clinics or blowing up Republican legislatures.
Right.
Right. It's got to be negotiated, because the reality is we agree on most everything. But the government has put itself in the places of disagreement and made it worse and made it worse.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I say, I don't remember if I said it in the book, but secessionists all over the place say that a free state that secedes from America will be more American than the United States.
I'm actually glad you said that, because one of the notes here that I haven't touched upon yet, and I was going to just let it pass because I missed the opportunity for it.
Right.
But I wanted to bring it up because it comes early in your book.
Yeah.
This distinction between the United States of America and America. Now, in what you say is what I was pledging allegiance to, what I love and I have loyalty to, is this idea of America, the Purple Mountain Majesty.
Absolutely. That doesn't change.
Right. So tell me about this distinction.
Yeah. So, I believe that the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the idea that maybe the people ought to have some say in the government, right? All the things that make, or that we ought to even defend the people who are being oppressed, whether that's let's keep Germany from invading England. I mean, there are some ways in which America does a lot of good stuff, right? Our current iteration of federal government does not do any of those things well. That's my take. So the principles of America, the idea of America, the things that we're loyal to about America are not a bunch of guys in offices in Washington, D.C., right? It's not the governmental structure that holds our hearts. It's the ideas. It's the freedom. It's the respect. It's the liberty. That doesn't change if you change who's sitting in the chairs, in my mind. So yes, I do. Many secessionists do distinguish between the United States government as being different than the idea of America. That's where we're coming from.
Right on. Okay. Next question, and we'll land this plane in a few minutes, but I have two or three more questions for you.
Yeah, do or don't. It's all good.
Process. You mentioned that the Civil War, the states voted. Being very ignorant, I didn't know that. So my question now is there a difference in process between what they did and what you're proposing?
Yeah. So on the first iteration, the states joined the Union by convention. Okay. So they called a convention and voted to join the Union. And then they voted to ratify the Constitution, right, as part of rejoining, after the Articles of Confederation. So at that time, they would have a convention of delegates and make the decision. Okay, that's my understanding. And so when it came time to leave, they used that same process. So they said, well, we're going to appoint, all these representatives, and we're going to go answer the question on Tuesday about whether we should leave or not. Right. Some states did votes. Texas actually did a popular vote. I think many states did. Again, not super fluent in that, but my understanding is they used a convention process, right? The same way they got in. That resulted in a war. So somebody was unhappy with how that went.
Right. Sounds cool. Sounds democratic, frankly.
It is democratic. It absolutely is democratic, which is, again, one of the reasons I take issue with Lincoln. But what we're proposing is not that. We are proposing to use the existing legal processes, not that other one time we did it. Let's do it that way again. Let's say, well, what is the law? What options do we have within the current structure? California is interesting because they actually have a referendum in their legal structure, right? So you can put it to a vote whether we're going to have mountain lion hunting in the state if you get enough signatures. That's one that has happened. So you could just as legally put it to a vote. Is California going to leave the union? If you follow the process and get enough signatures, you can have the vote. And the law says you're supposed to follow the vote, right? That's a different process than let's pick some delegates and go settle this issue. That's using the existing process
Right.
Texas does not have a referendum at all. There's no way to force a vote like that. So our proposal again is we'll put a bill through the legislature that authorizes the vote. So the delegated leaders decide we're going to have a vote on Tuesday, and then we have the vote on Tuesday, and that kicks off the process to disentangle, not the, whereas the previous iteration, it was more like we've seceded now by sucka, right?
Right.
It was not, let's figure this out, how to separate. It wasn't anything like Brexit where we follow this process of untangling. It was more like, F you, see ya.
How important was Brexit to the secessionist movement?
Oh, it was critical. So I told my children sitting at the breakfast table, I said, guys, guess what just happened? I said that England just decided to get out of the European Union. And what that means to me is that Texas is going to be independent someday, maybe even without a war. And I can't tell you if it'll be 10 years or 50. But we have started to see on the international stage large movements done peacefully of disentanglement. I was fired up to see that. I don't know if it's a good idea or not for Britain. I think it probably was. But from a process standpoint, the fact that we could have a major nation go through a peaceful withdrawal, I was fired up. That was good stuff. Now, the difference is they had, again, to use the marriage analogy, they had a prenup. Like when they got married to the European Union, they had a plan to disengage. Like they followed a disengagement process. America was early enough in the development of democracy. Like we invented this stuff. They hadn't even thought of prenup yet because we were still inventing what this marriage would look like.
We're just making it up as we went.
Sort of. And it worked. It did work. But things have progressed now. And so the newer constitutions, the newer nations, the newer groups have an exit clause. The United States Constitution didn't have that because the technology didn't exist at the time. There was just no reason, right? It just hadn't come up. We were inventing a new kind of government. We didn't think about how to get out of it, right? Because there's new technology at the time. So you're a lawyer, you talk about the constitutional argument a little bit. I could chase that rabbit pretty hard, but let me say it quickly, if that's okay. If you pull up the Constitution and you look for the word secession, it's not in there, period. Okay. Does that mean secession is unconstitutional? No, it means it's not in there. In the 10th Amendment, it says, paraphrasing, that the federal government reserves to itself everything that we said in this Constitution, and everything we didn't say is reserved to the states or the people. Okay, it's paraphrased. It's pretty accurate. So that's where secession is in the Constitution. It is not explicitly mentioned anywhere, which means that the government didn't enumerate those powers. And therefore, the 10th Amendment guarantees
nor
that
prohibit it,
to the states or to the people. That's where it is. So, when people say it's unconstitutional, I love that. Say, okay, cool, show me. It's not.
And you write about in the book. Apparently, there's a very important. I mean, apparently there is case Texas versus White.
Texas versus White is the one time.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that's a fun one. So, after the Civil War, 1869. So 4 years after a terrible conflict. The winners of the war said that they got to keep the money. That's what that case was about.
No shit.
Yeah, you imagine that. The Confederate government of Texas had spent some money. The Reconstruction government of Texas wanted that money back. And so a Supreme Court that had 7 justices, but 5 of them were appointed by Lincoln, decided that the winners got to keep the money. And oh, by the way, you had no right to secede in the first place. Right. So it was a case not about secession. It was a case about who gets to keep the money. The winners, of course, were going to win because also they had the whole court. Right. There was no way the court could say, yeah, I know that war was only 4 years ago, but they were mostly right. We shouldn't have, politically, there's no way they couldn't say that the Civil War was bad at this point.
Right.
And so, it was, to me, a cultural political decision where the winners got to keep the stuff. And oh, by the way, let me reinforce that we won because we're rightist, and you had no right to do that to begin with. So that's what Texas versus White was. It does say that the states have no right to secede. In context, there was no other possible answer that they could have given. The other thing I talk about Supreme Court is, that was 1869. there are multiple precedents that have been overturned by the Supreme Court. Roe v. Wade being a recent one. Yes, it is. Oh, wait, no, we're kicking it back to the states. Okay. That's just the most recent example. It's not the best. There are also some interesting precedents that have never been overturned. Buck v. Bell is a good one. I think that was in the 20s. The state, the Supreme Court decided that the state may sterilize people based on disability or mental illness. Okay, so all these people, they're not good breeders. We will use the power of the state to sterilize the ones in the institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't think anybody would argue that right now as a good idea.
Some
and
would,
yet,
yeah, but not
that
many,
has never been overturned. That is the
right.
current Supreme Court precedent.
Right.
And it's totally irrelevant to the way the world works. Texas versus White, to me, falls in that same category. It was a decision made for political reasons at the time, not particularly relevant right now. So just because it stands, I don't care.
Right.
You know, as a secessionist, I'm not going to ask some other country's Supreme Court what I can do.
that probably is the overriding logic. You know, hey, look, I mean, we're talking about splitting away from this union. I mean, I really don't care what even the highest court in the land has to say about it.
Yep,
right.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I understand that.
So that's the argument from the secessionist side, is that, you know, it is constitutional. It's right there in the gap of the 10th Amendment.
Do the secessionists would they rather have an independent Texas or an ideally optimized
Depends
America?
on who you ask. Depends on who you ask. You know, those of us who have tipped over to advocating for separation have come to the conclusion that America is past saving. Right? I don't see a strategy. I don't see a marriage counselor in this national divorce. There's no such thing. Right? There's no way to fix it at this point. And so we would rather see an independent Texas, or heck, an independent New Hampshire, an independent North Dakota. Right. I would rather, you know, I want that for everybody. There are people, there's some disagreement on our side of the fence about whether we should form a new confederacy of some sort, in a technical confederation, European Union kind of sense, not in terms of the previous conflict, but whether we should form some other larger country or have smaller independent places. Honestly, that'll play out as it plays out. You know, anybody will have to decide who their allies are and who their friends are and who they want to make deals with and who they want to have treaties with. I can't predict that. Personally, I would prefer an independent Texas, period, not an independent Southern coalition of some kind. Because again, I'm in favor of free trade and, you know, mutual agreements. I don't think we need to be under the same federal structure or overarching government structure to have most of that stuff. Right. That's my take.
Yeah, I could understand why people like yourself who have been tipped over would look at this divorce counseling concept metaphorically as just too much time. Hey, man, like
no, it's not about time. It's about practicality. So if my wife and I are in trouble and we need some help, we can go find an expert whose day job is to help couples in trouble resolve their issues, right? And it's me making bad decisions and her making bad decisions and somebody to help us resolve all that.
Right.
America is nothing like that. There are 350 million people. There are 2 large camps, sure, but each camp is made up of a bajillion different entities.
So this is where the metaphor breaks down.
It does. It does. So there is no, I have not conceived of a way where there's a qualified mediator who can serve as a counselor to negotiate and help this.
Well, now you're inspiring me. Now I know what to do. We can make Searching for Political Identity the launching pad for the next constitutional convention.
There you go.
And we can fix everything, and I will be famous because of it. I love it.
There you go. I like it. But again, that's my take, is that, yes, I would rather, in a relationship, I would rather see counseling than divorce every time. Right. But in this metaphor, it's not possible. There's nobody. It's not 2 individuals. It's 2 huge groups of people. Right. And there's no one person or even country entity that can serve as that mediator. in
Right.
the
No,
way
I
that
know
we
you've
would all
mentioned
understand
in
counseling.
other interviews, you've mentioned how it couldn't be Mexico, couldn't be Canada, maybe the UK culturally, but so that was an interesting aside
Yeah,
from
that was
one of your
kind of
previous. Yeah.
random, but yeah, it
Yeah.
was.
No, it was interesting, but
I was
point
just
being,
chasing the rabbit.
yeah, no, point being that it's not obvious that there's any entity that could do that. And so
Yeah,
when I referenced time, I really meant that you would have to create that entity, and there's the time
yeah,
that could that even be
yeah,
done?
yeah. And if
Yeah.
you're going to recreate something, let's just let's just go
Right.
ahead and recreate something, right? Let's not
Right.
build another thing.
Right, like Elon says, with the I'm certainly no engineer, but often just deleting things is the best way forward.
Sometimes.
Yeah, so actually, it's a good transition to my last
Yeah.
question, because I know you weren't expecting a Trump win.
I was not.
I was hoping for it once I came into his
Mhm.
camp, but I wasn't expect. I also was like in the last 48 hours up to the election, I was like, oh fuck, he's gonna get his ass kicked,
Yeah, same.
Um,
Same.
and so Trump wins, and he's got Elon and he's got Vivek, and they're
Mhm.
doging everything.
Yeah,
And
bring
Elon's an
it.
engineer, so this is really interesting.
Yeah, it's
But I
actually
know
pretty exciting.
it's exciting. So, do we stand a chance at fixing the problem? Tell me.
So again, I will say I have not ever voted for Trump ever, not in a primary, not in a general. Okay, I think he's a lousy human being. That said,
Hmm,
um, politically, he was the best choice this time. I couldn't
yeah,
do it for moral reasons, but he was the best
yeah,
choice in
so
my mind.
interesting. Yeah.
Um, again, I live in a very red state. Who I choose to vote for makes zero difference in the final outcome. So I have that luxury of voting my conscience. Okay, I get that. It's not normal.
I assume
Um,
you wrote in Elizabeth Warren.
yeah, that's totally what I did. No, I actually voted Libertarian for the third election in a row, even though I was not a fan of the Libertarian candidate this time. Again, a protest vote doesn't matter. You can write in you can write in whatever you want to write in. It's
Yeah,
still not going to change the outcome, right? So I voted Libertarian again, even though I knew, I don't even like that guy. But
right.
I just can't. I couldn't vote for the grab him by the junk guy.
Hmm,
It just
interesting.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't
So
do
I
it.
know you have a religious background, so you couldn't bring you couldn't get to the Rick. What's his name? Rick Perry. Is that the former governor of
Yeah,
Texas,
former
right?
governor of Texas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He once wrote Trump a one-page letter saying, explaining how he thought Trump was using him, as an
Uh huh.
imperfect vessel. Not you, not your camp.
Well, no. So in the book I talk about, does God
You
use
do,
lousy people? Of
right?
course he does.
Right.
That doesn't exempt them from the consequences of their actions, though, right? So I can at the same time say that
Hmm.
Trump was put in place by God, and he's a lousy person, and some of his stuff is going to catch up with him. Like, I don't hold those intentions. That's just me. Largely influenced by David Lipscomb, a philosopher from my religious background post Civil War. But anyway, so yeah, I think Trump was a better choice. I'm not disappointed that he won, although it has hurt book sales,
Hmm.
because the grievance of the right is the language I'm fluent in. I've learned to speak, I think reasonably intelligently about the left. I care, but that's not my people. And like the separation urge or the self determination urge is a right wing thing. It applies to the left. Golly, I wish the left would figure out that they could have it their way if they would just go,
Hmm.
because that's the answer to the whole thing.
But
You
they
know,
won't let go of the
but
whole
but
controlling
they
other
but that's
people.
not their culture. That's not their worldview. The worldview is the government helps and the government's good and the government
Right.
fixes.
Right.
Right. I want
Right.
them to
Right.
take that worldview and go fix it over there and leave me alone. But
Right.
they don't, that separation piece is not a part of their background or their
Right.
rhetoric. That's why I wrote the book so simply. There are plenty of better research books out there, but I want a book somebody can understand and be like, well, wait a minute, maybe I could have it my way over here. Maybe we don't
Right.
have to have a civil war. Maybe they're not all crazy, and I'm not all crazy either. Right?
Right.
That's where I'm coming from. So, but you asked the question about, can Trump change the trajectory in a meaningful way? My answer is no, and here's why. Um, the deficit continued to rise under Trump. Some would say it got even worse, right? That the numbers have gone terrible since the first Trump administration. And a lot of that to me is on Trump himself or on that administration. You can't blame Biden for the inflation caused by shutting down half of the economy.
Hmm.
Trump, it's the whole thing is gnarly. Um, number next. If we're going to argue, let me make up some stupid numbers. So if we're going to say the United States is at 100% right now and it's 100% bad, it's not. But if we said that for this analogy, how much percentage could Trump fix? Right. So say they go Doge half of everything, then it's only 50% bad.
Right.
There's still tons and tons of room for improvement. I think there will be improvements, particularly for those of us who prefer a little less intervention. I see that coming, but I don't think it changes the trajectory. It doesn't make Congress start passing laws. It doesn't make the administrative state stop messing with stuff. It doesn't change the flip flop between teams when the other team wins. Right. The main structural problems don't get fixed by a couple of years worth of good hard work in one direction. That's my take. It's not, I support the idea that we should be minimizing and cutting and undoing, but I don't see that a couple of years or even 4 changes the long-term trajectory in any meaningful way.
So I suppose, putting myself in your shoes and your brethren, it would be, hey, it's great to see a last-ditch effort. It's too late, but great, good for you to try it, give it your best shot, and maybe you'll make some differences. And this probably is our last best shot, but it's not likely, and we're already too far gone.
Well, yeah. So, like, if you're old and you break your hip, for some people that's the end. They never recover from that. For others, they go through some difficult work, difficult rehab, and they recover from that, but they still die anyway, eventually, right? To me, this Doge thing or the Trump minimalist thing is sort of like starting to exercise when you're 68. It's like it will extend your life. It absolutely will, but it's not going to change the quality of the whole trajectory, right? You have still done so much that you can't totally turn the ship around by that point. Like that's the way I look at it. We're late in the game.
That's a good
so
analogy.
You can absolutely make improvements that will improve your quality even in the short term, but it doesn't change the longest long-term answer, right? It may make the dissolution period go from 5 years to 15 years, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still got all these structural problems underneath. That's kind of the way I look at those guys.
Interesting.
It is a good move to apply some of those strategies in my mind.
Sure.
But I just don't see it changing the ultimate outcome.
Right. And here I am just coming onto the political scene in earnest and having to assess for myself how much do I agree with you? How deep are the problems? As I look around and start to really dig in, and it does seem that we're obviously very divided. The question is that on the surface, or how deep does it go? And so this is something I have to continue to wrestle with. Obviously, I'm not prepared. Well, maybe it's not obvious, but I'm not prepared to. You have not turned me into an advocate today.
No, I wouldn't expect to.
Right. But it's a really great book.
So let me flip it on you then.
Flip it on
me. What do you see as the answer to this problem? Let's take as a base assumption that things are very divisive and that things are bad.
Yeah.
What would you say is the answer to that?
Well, having launched this journey because of studying critical race theory in my final year of law school and being keen to that and sensing that a lot of it has to do with the narratives that come out of academia. And so that's why I've gone against the left, I would say, and it's happening, but it needs to be a victory of narratives. We have to get back to, call it merit, call it colorblind, what you will. We have to get back to where people are empowered, and we're talking about what unifies us more than what divides us. So we just have to start by cleansing the narrative. That doesn't mean we can't ever talk about complaints or injustices, but and actually it's interesting. The more I think about it, the more I see areas of agreement between libertarians and, let's say, like Black Lives Matter. They both have problems with the state. So everyone can argue with the state, but it's this, I guess the question is the population capable of coming back to a place where they believe in the values that founded this country and can look past the fact that slavery existed? We know it was horrible, but weren't we at a place where we understood that they were imperfect? Can we get back to that golden mean where we're looking forward freshly, optimistically? So for me, it would just be about cleansing the narrative and trying to be positive and being honest about where the government has overreached culturally and saying, hey, look, like we got to respect states' rights without, we got to find that balance between civil liberties and states' rights.
Yeah.
And so I would look for that as well. And I don't know, at the end of the day, what does my gut tell me? My gut tells me that we are very divided and we need someone who is going to, is speaking in unified tones enough. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either. I can't imagine that guy. I agree conceptually,
right.
Like that if we had something to unite behind and say this is what we have. But honestly, my fear. Okay, I'm a bad predictor of things, but here's what I predict. I predict that the machine, the establishment, the government, will continue to promote bad guys overseas as a way to distract from all of these problems. You know, if we end up to our neck in World War III against Russia and China, then guys like me who just want to be left alone will fall out of. Yeah. We will be the minority, right? That's my prediction, honestly, and it's a terrible outcome. I think that's bad for humanity, right? For more of us to kill each other, that's bad. But that's what I would guess. That's why my book is called A Plan for Peace. It's like, how can we avoid that? Let's do it this way instead. I think what I promote is a viable way to not end up over there, right? To minimize the casualties, to let people have it their way. But really what I predict, though, is World War III and centralization, and we unify around a boogeyman and unify around we've got to save the world from whatever. That's sort of what I have to predict.
More tightening of the noose, so to speak.
Yeah. It's the machine will perpetuate itself, and they will use some war, some common cause on the other side of the world to keep us unified around everything but what's going on at home. That's my cynical take on life.
that's it's negative, and I like it because that's where I come from. No, but
well, I don't wish for that. That's just what I predict.
I know. And I guess it'll kind of be up to people like me who are starting to pay attention and where are we going to land, as time marches on, and that probably happens. How is Brian Eskow going to feel about his government, as he really starts to follow this stuff?
Well, and that's kind of what I decided too. Is like, well, somebody's got to get out there and say something different than that. What can I do to influence? Well, I can get out and say, well, what if we didn't have a war? What if we decided that the best way to get along is to get along separately? I mean, I'm in the same boat as you, kind of. Like, what can I personally do to move the trajectory? Well, I can get a message out, and we'll put it out on the marketplace of ideas, and maybe I win, maybe I don't, but it's got to be discussed.
You're doing your part. And I appreciate it. And that's exactly the type of person I've been trying to reach out to.
Yep,
so
that's why I've gravitated towards you, even though I agree we're probably on fairly different parts of the spectrum in a lot of ways. Don't care.
Right.
I appreciate that you're willing to examine everything critically.
Well, I mean, that's why
that's cool.
I think
that's unusual.
I appreciate that. And maybe there is a hint of truth when I say I'd like to be part of this movement that, because have you seen the documentary Best of Enemies on Netflix? It was you've probably seen the old debates. I think it was like 1968 between William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal covering it was like the presidential primaries or something.
Yeah, I don't know that
but
one.
The story is there was like 3 networks on TV at the time, and ABC was like the 4th, and they had no money, and so they couldn't send their people to the conventions to cover them. So they just had 2 intellectuals get on set and have 10 debates over the course of 2 weeks, and it was like the beginning of punditry. And it was so, like, because they were so smart and so respectful and so reserved, and then in the 10th debate or something, like, it almost came to blows. Like, it was just like really funny. William F. Buckley Gore Vidal triggered William F. Buckley, and he almost punched him. But it was an important piece for me. Like, I like the idea of respectful dialogue, and you don't see enough of it these days. And
no, you don't.
I am trying to be part of that environment. So
yep, very cool.
I appreciate your time, man. Everyone should go buy this. I think we've whetted their palate, and
I hope so. So let me
Yeah.
tell you about that. So
Yeah,
the book is available on Amazon if you think Jeff Bezos needs more money.
I do.
But don't you? Right. But it is also available direct from me, autographed copies at national-divorce.com. So again, buy them from me. I'm a regular guy just trying to feed my kids,
Right.
but they are on Amazon too. If you,
Right on.
especially if you like Kindle, the
Right.
electronic version is available over there. So yeah, one more shot at the book
Yeah.
here. My lighting is funny. I open the window.
Oh yeah, there's no
Now
winning with the light.
Now the sun has gone crazy. But anyway, that's
Right.
the book, National Divorce: A Plan for Peace. So national-divorce.com
Yeah.
is the place
How
to
many?
get that.
This really was a great read, man. How many? Is this your first book? No.
No, yes and no. So this is my fourth book. I've written 3 knife making books.
Right.
I write for a knife making magazine. Like I said, I wrote in the background for the Texas Independence folks for 6 years. But this is my first politics book.
Right.
I've been to graduate school a couple of times. I know how to synthesize and write, but
Yeah. No,
I would
sure.
not say I'm an expert in this field. I've put together a good piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I'm
Well,
at.
I think you should be really proud of it. And I was great.
I am. Who knows? I'd be even
Right.
prouder if I could get a few of them out of my garage. But
Right. Well,
but it's all good. It's all good. My goal was really, again, to get the message out that maybe we should get along.
right.
That the best way to do that is to choose to separate.
It's been a pleasure connecting with you, man. And
Yeah, you too, Brian.
always appreciate a thought-provoking conversation. This has been that. And
Exactly.
let's stay in touch.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Good talking to you.
Likewise. Have a great rest of your day. Later.